Good evening, El Paso. Welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where our mission is to share the fun of the big questions with you. My name is Dr. Kim Diaz, and I teach philosophy at El Paso Community College.
And my name is Jules Simon, and I teach philosophy at University of Texas, El Paso.
And today we feel very grateful to be here interviewing none other than Ms. Laura Erickson Alvarado, with whom we've had the honor and pleasure of working for the last 3 years. Ms. Erickson and I both work at the Mission del Paso campus, and we're often in dialogue with each other. She teaches speech classes to our students at the Mission campus, and she's also the advisor for the Speech and Communication Student Club, and also in the past she served as the debate team co-sponsor. Ms. Erickson is also currently a doctoral student in the Ph.D. Teaching, Learning, and Culture program at the University of Texas at El Paso. She has a master's degree in communication and a bachelor's degree in organizational communication from the University of Texas at El Paso. Her area of experience includes teaching high school and college students. She has taught at EPCC since 2013. Also, her research interest lies in the sociocultural foundation of the doctoral program and schooling experiences of students of color, specifically Latinas and Black women. She's currently working on publishing a book chapter on this topic titled Allies in Solidarity, Transcend Guilt and Unlearn Patriarchal Privileges, Diversity and Unity and the Advancement of a Critical Feminist Movement. Thank you for joining us today. Laura, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and I appreciate the invitation, and I look forward to our dialogue and our conversation.
Yeah, it's real interesting for me to be talking with this about you because you teach speech. You know, like philosophers speculate, but that's not my area. So like you actually teach speech. So what would you tell us? What is dialogue? What do you think of, what do you tell your students?
Well, dialogue I think is essential. I think dialogue is not just those like reflection, discussion, analysis. Dialogue is in a speech communication context. Of course, it's a message, right, and how we construct that message and how we deliver it, and a background in communication. We analyze communication in different contexts through different mediums and forms, and so we take on different subjects and topics, and there are different types of communications, intercultural, multicultural, interpersonal, etc. And what I teach are the speech communication courses, and one public speaking and the other in a business context, and so developing, interviewing, building a cover letter and a resume. Anyways, and so I tell them that dialogue is essential for the message they want to construct and how they want to deliver that, and no matter what field or profession they're going into or what journey they want to take or what they want to do with their lives, it's really, really essential. And I always also tell them, because my personality and the way I am, dialogue is empathy, dialogue is, listening, and dialogue is also conflict, dialogue is also looking at other perspectives, other ways of thinking, of seeing the world, and including that in the conversation, different ways of being, right, and different ways of learning, and so there's difference and there's disagreement, and that's also part of dialogue, and as well as sharing your perspective and opinion and beliefs, and so I tell them that in the classes it's how they construct it and how they deliver it, right, and that's of course very important, but for them to be who they are, for them to always put their best foot forward and etc. So anyways, I'm just a very advocate, I guess a big advocate for my students, and it comes out a lot in my work as well. And I think in dialogue, or when you talk about dialogue, all that it's important is difference, conflict, agreement, beliefs, all that.
To me, that's really interesting.
Can I jump in here?
And join in the dialogue.
Join in the dialogue? Well,
Of course.
Well, yeah, join in. So you mentioned empathy. So in what way do you teach empathic dialogue, or the element of empathy that plays in dialogical encounters? So I'm writing a book, and one of the chapters on empathy. So I'm really interested in the...
But let me also say this, though, because like we think about dialogue, right? Like philosophic dialogues, La Frontera. But I was talking about how sometimes being in dialogue is like being wrestlers, you know? And I said, you know, there is tension in dialogue. It's not just... And so it's funny because I focus on the tension and the conflict, which sometimes is part of it. And then Jules is like, tell me more about the empathy.
Yeah.
You know, the opposites of, but both are there. I don't know. So what is the empathy part of the dialogue?
Yeah, how do you teach empathy in dialogue? So that's really interesting
You know,
to me.
I suppose maybe like coming out of the conflict, you know, because sometimes...
Well, not necessarily even conflict. It
No?
doesn't have to include conflict.
Okay, well, mine does.
And I think, you know, it doesn't, right? And what I do, for example, in my classes, when I have students interview someone else, and they're interviewing another, well, this isn't another professional, and, you know, seeing how their journey, where they came from, where they studied, where they went to college, where they worked, and this is in the business context, it's a business course, but they interview someone that they're a field that they're thinking of going into, or a profession, and if they want to go into accounting or whatnot, or engineering, and so they interview this individual, and I have them, you know, they set up their questions, open-ended questions, more than close-ended. And they you know, so where did they study, where did they get the degree, you know, and I tell them, I'm like, well, ask them about their struggle and their journey, you know, working, because a lot of our students work and go to school at the same time, and the challenges of that and how they overcame that, and I'm like, ask, you know, advice, of course, about profession, you know, engineering or accounting, but also, you know, ask about struggle or school, the obstacles that arise in school, how to you know, get advice about how to finish, how to obtain a bachelor's degree, what you should do. And so then they go ahead and they interview this individual, and they submit the questions to me and the recording, and I think it allows them to really step into someone else's way or seeing things, or how experiencing someone else's journey, and a lot of our, I think, people that live here in El Paso can really relate to our students, and some, you know, they work a lot, as, you know, go to school, and sometimes they have a lot of obstacles or a lot of things to overcome in their educational journey. And so then I think that empathy, they see someone else and where they come from, and they apply it to themselves, and then they do that. And I'm a big also a lot of collaboration, group collaboration in my classes, so working with each other, and being able to kind of mold, come together, as you know, because there's the conflict in groups, etc. But, you know, being able to know you cannot get out of the group, you have to stay with those that you're working with, and anyways, but it allows them to, in the group, also meet individuals from different, you know, areas of knowledge. But so I have for empathy, I have them do that interview. I have I always, with communication, one of the things that I love to teach is that, well, it's so easy to tie into current events. I mean, so in my class, if we're looking at, well, we look at culture, conflict. We look, and also we could bring in, you know, what's happening in Texas. You know, we can bring in different issues like that. What's happening in the U.S. around, not just in the U.S. church, outside of the U.S. too, right? Mm-hmm. And So we look at different topics like that, and I think that also, and I have them do different assignments, the research, and I have them do essays, or they present on. I have one where they present on a different culture. They research it, present on it, and then so I guess with the empathy is learning about someone else, and then
And what if what you
Mhm.
learn you disagree with?
Okay.
And because how it's a real skill, to continue working together even though we disagree with each other, right? Like
Yeah.
in the group you mentioned,
Yeah.
they have to stay in the group
Yeah, they have to-
because that's
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
but
know?
let me come back
Yeah.
to the empathy part
Yeah.
in particular, because etymologically, at the root of the word, it's pathos. And so it does have something to do with conflict and suffering, right? Because
Strong emotions.
well, it's what we undergo and what we suffer, right? So we undergo these feelings and emotions. And so the way I understand empathy, and you touched on a lot of different areas,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Getting to know the other person, where you come from. The way I approach it is that any genuine sort of dialogue that occurs has to have, at some level, some basis in empathy. Because you have to learn to be able to be open to listen to the other as other, right? And be able then to see, understand, listen for the differences and the similarities,
And it's
right? Without getting caught up in them, right?
It-
Because then
yeah.
that's sympathy, right? There's a big difference between
well,
that, right? So-
or downright conflict. Like if I really believe that this person is inherently wrong.
No, but the
Or-
point I was trying to make is that without empathy, I don't ever get to know myself. So by learning what's the same and different from the other, I get to learn about myself. So it's at the very basis of self-knowledge.
But we also learn who we are in conflict with others. Like, we disagree, and so that defines where I stand in a more marked way than if we kind of just agree all the time.
No, it's not a matter of agreeing, though. Empathy is not a matter of agreeing, because I'm not the same as the other person.
Or
What I'm
if I
listening
see
for.
it, if I see it the way they see it. But if I really disagree, then I'm marking my identity more.
Well, that's the confusion between empathy and sympathy. So in
Okay.
sympathy, I embrace the oneness, and I'm with you, and the
Okay.
mob mentality builds
Okay.
up, right? But empathy is not that. It's about understanding,
Okay.
and I'm listening for the emotional difference, the cognitive differences, the whole spectrum of similarities and differences that are between us, right? So
Okay.
I'm not identifying with the other person, and that avoids conflict then. So I'm really learning the other perspective, and my own perspective at the same time, that the other's other than me, right?
Yeah.
So and asking them, to define, or rather to
Okay.
ask about where they come from, and do they like eating pizza on Friday nights or whatever, right? But it presupposes that we need the other person to find out about the other person in order to find out more about myself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I do see that, and I like how you
That's the
say.
dialogue part.
Yeah, I like how you see how you say the similarity and the differences, right, and being able to move forward and not, how I think especially with some of the topics that I have in the course, I always tell them, because there's controversial topics, right, and they get very heated,
Right.
and right now, like Kim, we'll go to conflict. Kim's like, I want to talk about conflict.
Right.
And
This
it's important.
is. I was preparing this because of Kim as well, because I know you were on the debate
Yeah, so yeah,
spectrum as well.
and we will, but I think, and I tell them when we approach these topics, we think about similarity and difference, right? I'm like, you have to let them, get through their presentation, through their perspective, through
Right.
their through their information. And I always tell them, like, pick up something that maybe relates to you or that applies to you. And I tell them, for example, when we do persuasive speaking, I tell them, like, it's not that you're going to get someone to agree with you 100%. I mean, that's never going to happen. But if you
unless you're married,
yeah, well, not even then. But if you have someone, as we think about that,
they always agree.
Right, that's what my husband says too. But I always tell them that if you have someone question their belief or their argument, or if you have them doubt something, or if you have them question something, I mean, there's power in that, right? I'm like, the dialogue, there's power in that, and that's why dialogue is so important. And I mean, of course, in the communication context, but even then, I bring that in and try to build that, because I don't like and I don't have these attacks on each other or disrespect, or because sometimes it's very polarized, right? They're on different sides of an issue on spectrum.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. Sometimes if you disagree with me and you question me, because it's common sense to me what I'm thinking, right? And I'm thinking I'm right. Of course. And so then, but you know what? Then I'm like, well, I hadn't thought of that. And so then through that tension, I have to think about something that had not even occurred to me. And so it really helps me even define what I'm thinking and who I am. So it's not necessarily always negative to disagree.
No, it isn't. And I think our students or everyone in general, in the public, they see the opposite of that, right? I'm like, just because you disagree with someone, they think it equals hate, or this person is horrible. But no, disagreement, it doesn't mean, it should not, it strengthens the communication process or dialogue, disagreement. It doesn't mean, you can agree to disagree, right? You don't have to disagree and dislike the other person. But I think nowadays we see so much of that hate and that...
Well, just a different way, just to shift this a little bit, a different way of thinking about this is that when you run up against this, you're thinking differently than me, what that illuminates is difference. And there's this unhealthy drive that we have to reduce everything to sameness. I'm speaking as a philosopher, right?
Yeah. And
so I want everything
to
to be the same.
To me.
And the sameness, I want things my way, to be the same as my way, right? But we never respect the difference of the other then, right? And that takes a lot of patience, it takes a lot of control, it takes a lot of awareness,
confidence in yourself.
Confidence in yourself to just, I'm okay, I'm going to listen to what you have to say, and find out, maybe what your issue is, or why you're crying, or
what
why
did
you're
I
laughing.
say? What did I say that made you cry?
Or what did somebody else say? I mean, it's a matter. So the point there I was trying to get is that by me asserting that empathy is at the basis of any kind of authentic dialogue, it's also at the basis of building communities, because we have to respect differences, right? And not just reduce everybody to this one common sameness and crowd.
As if I think it's so interesting. It's such a failed, misguided project, but we continue, right? We keep trying. And so I want to go back to your work, your research. I thought it was really interesting, the title of your chapter, because to me it seems very dialogical, right?
Yeah, I had trouble following it all. Could you just say it again?
Right. And so it's
I also read the abstract, and so to me that was really interesting what you're doing.
Yeah, no, and I think so it comes from pretty much as because I'm still a doctoral student, and so what I do is with the College of Education and focusing on pedagogy or schooling experiences of students of color. And then so that was my area of interest, or is my area of interest, and I've done different studies. Well, primarily I've done qualitative, but I've done quantitative before. And so I look at their educational journeys. They're from from K through 12, then in the college, then looking into specifically focusing on college graduation, and so students of color graduating college with a bachelor's degree. So then that's what I look for. So what will help them achieve or obtain that bachelor's degree? Because primarily UTEP has, of course, a Hispanic population, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here in El Paso, EPCC is who we serve, but other colleges and universities, don't. Other sometimes students of color that don't graduate, they usually tend to, after they get their associates, 2 years, they tend to drop out and not get a bachelor's, which is 4 years, of course. And so then my research looks to, why, what's happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I focus more on Latinas and Black women, but also our Latinos, we have a lot of male students in our classrooms, and so then I look to that. So how can they succeed in college? How can they obtain their bachelor's degree?
I noticed in your title you had solidarity, allies, right? And so
diversity, and so
yeah.
then that's where I started, and that's what I like to do. Then I started looking at in doing the research, as I build, as this goes, as both as you have, literature reviews and all this, right? As I look at the literature and do the research, then I start seeing, where does ally solidarity come in, and feminist movement. In that, so in the feminist movement, are women of color, being more at the forefront, being more sometimes in communities of color. So, for example, if you have Latinos and you have, Black women or men, there tends to be a tension, or there tends to, and that's what the interest, that's what sparks or interests me. And I came across that also when I was interviewing some of my participants. And then I'm like, but why? And why does it occur when we should, come together, fight certain, certain forces, that we want to fight. But anyways, and so it came up because when I was interviewing a participant one time, and she was telling me that in her school, and there was like tension between the Latino students and the Black students, and so anyways, and that was in that context. But then also, so from there it kind of sparked in looking at the literature, and then reading works of different feminist scholars. We have there's Bell Hooks, Gloria Anzaldúa, and so bringing more to the forefront women of color and in the feminist movement. And so that's an area of interest that I have too as well. And then in the chapter that I'm working, my a colleague and advisor is Dr. Rosato, who's with the Department of Education. And then we look at, he was talking about, we talk about unlearning patriarchal privileges. And so, and in that, and I don't want to speak for him, but what we're looking at is, sometimes being in the same level, same power level as someone, then you're able to have more of a dialogue with that individual, maybe enact change more. So meaning, for example, because he has done research on like teaching white students, right? Or teaching students of color. And so sometimes, white students and being white or being male, a man, you have to unlearn certain privileges that you've had in life, right? And I think we look at ourselves, we've all had different privileges, or we haven't, right? But in that context of, so, a white man talking to other white men, because we have white students, right? And talking about looking at the same privileges, same power level, entering in dialogue with each other to see, well, what is it? 'Cause sometimes well, we never want to assume things, right? Because everyone's different, but I'm saying sometimes our white students, think a certain way, or of other students of color, or of our community here. The unlearning patriarchal privileges is same level, and just entering in that dialogue with each other. And so we bring in that component, and we look at this so to solidify, to have more of the solidarity, right, and allies, because it's not it's not an attack on white men. It's how can we have, if you're white, or how can you be an ally to students of color, or different people of color? Because I myself, I consider myself Latina, and my mother is Mexican, is from Chihuahua, but my father was white. So there's Latinos have different experiences, right? You can never label or categorize them in one, right? The realities are multiple and diverse. But anyways, so then just entering in dialogue with each other, talking more, and me helping my students the best I can, or other students of color. And so I identify as Latina, I do, but helping each other, and so we have different allies. And so my father was white, and he was an ally, advocate for many communities, and that's where I get a lot of what I do also. But so looking at this, so solidarity, allies, and that's what sparked my interest, and in this dialogue that we have with each other, right? We bring the realities of people of color to the forefront. Now we see with all Black Lives Matter, all these things going on, racist ideology, all this, and we bring their reality to the forefront, and they bring their own reality to the forefront. And right now we'll go into, when we talk about Paulo Freire, right? And so the oppressed, they are liberate themselves, right? And the oppressor cannot come and liberate the oppressed, right? Because the oppressed are the ones that have the power for the liberation, right? And all these areas, I think, is where my research interest lies, and it's what I'm looking at, and it's what I'm exploring. Looking at the schooling experiences of students of color, particularly women, Latinas and Black women. Looking at feminism, feminist movement, feminist scholars.
Yeah.
And then we bring in patriarchy and having different allies, and it doesn't matter, we unlearn, or we grow, and we in life, but you could be allied to our students of color, right? And so then in my research, as I'm just starting, and so while I've been in the program a while, but I'm getting to the dissertation phase already, is what I mean starting. And I'm doing everything that I've done is the research for that, and so I'm just bringing in different interests that I have. So this is where it all, the title does have loaded words, and this is what the words mean to me and come together.
It's very dialogical.
Solidarity and diversity. Let me ask you another
dialogical.
question, then a follow-up to Kim's more general question. So, do you find in terms of feminism, working with Latinas and Black women, do you find yourself having to deal with adversarial relations between those groups and groups of white women, say? Or do you find the propensity to be the women looking for more solidarity? Because the groups themselves self-identify, are polarized themselves, right? And so even though there's a general patriarchal,
like a common enemy,
patriarchy is all over the place, right? It's up and down throughout the world. It's really hard to. I just finished a unit on Simone de Beauvoir, and she's so comprehensive in her canvassing of the dominance of patriarchy and women being othered. But she doesn't raise specifically the question, well, she does indirectly, that women train women to be patriarchal, who have come under the dominance of patriarchy. That's the unlearning patriarchy part, right? But my question is more, do you find in your research or in the work in the classroom even, this polarization of the different groups of women by their ethnic identities, do you find them? And then there's a difficulty in dialogue there, right? I mean, how do you create
There's race, and then there's also class, right?
How do you even create the empathy from...
There's race, there's class, there's physical ability, all that, right? So
Yeah, so do you find them holding their ethnic ground, their racial grounds? Or
Well,
more?
you know, and yes, it tends to be very adversarial. I mean, yes, they tend to be holding on to their ground, and there's a lot of conflict, and the feminist movement has been criticized for being white, and so and then there's tension in that, right? And then yes, I feel like sometimes that reading different scholars or different works, like everyone's in their own camp, and so yes, but it's something that I want to dig in and learn more about because it sparks my interest.
Yeah, because I get something very different reading Simone de Beauvoir and Toni Morrison and Ansel Dua. I mean, there's just three different feminist perspectives, right? Very different.
Well,
And
I like bell hooks. Bell hooks is so open, you know, and in fact, we invited her to our show, so she might still say yes. I'm hoping.
Oh, that'd be
right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to definitely. You'll see me there in the
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, and what do you think, Kim? I mean, your experience. I mean, not. I have my interest, right? Of course, but I don't know. You know, I think you've done so many talks and presentations and
she's not going to answer it. She's throwing it back on you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
observing, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm just observing, and it
Yeah.
seems like, and that was one of our questions, if we need to have a certain type of disposition,
Yeah.
you know, to be in dialogue with each other, because,
Yeah.
you know, some of it is getting my point across, you know, as clearly, and my message, you know,
Yeah.
but at the same time, being open to learning and growing and how because if I'm wrong, I want to know so that I can learn and, you know, not make mistakes, right? I'm any more than I'm already. And so, but Bell Hooks comes at it, she seems so empathetic, you know, so understanding, in terms of just embracing everybody.
Yeah, and so you can see what I do in the classroom. This is what I do in the classroom. I throw the questions, and sometimes I answer them depending what they're asking me, the student, or sometimes, excuse me, I throw it back at them. But to what you're saying, yes, it is so important, I think, to really kind of learn from each other in dialogue, and with bell hooks. So then, I guess as I read all these different scholars and the way that impacts me is so she was a. And I don't want to speak for her either, but she also studied Paulo Freire, right? And Freire's criticism was that he had a lot from the feminist movement, that he had excluded, you know, the oppression of women in his work.
Right.
And so, but then as bell hooks, but then his work isn't valuable because he talks about humanization, right? How can we humanize each other? I mean,
yes, and
so
just because you're a feminist, it doesn't mean that you're a humanist, you know, like depending, right? Or just because I'm a Freirean, it doesn't mean I'm a humanist. I can be oppressive in a non-dialogical way, you know, like, I don't know, like, is Freirean synonymous with good? Always,
right, well,
you know, or is feminist always synonymous with good? You know, like, it seems like they, everybody can have their off days.
Yeah, I know, but I think
where we're not listening.
Yeah, but I think the dialogue part, what's so important about it is just having these conversations, right? So, I mean, so why, or you know, if we bring in different individuals or different people, right? Well, you know, why this or why that, or okay, well, you know, why so or how? And you know, well, that comes from my communication background, right? Always questioning, but I think it's important to have these different voices in dialogue is what I'm saying, and really learn from each other.
So what about the disposition? What about, you know, how precisely so that we keep learning? Because there is the aspect of getting our message across, but which I think, I don't know, I don't struggle with. I'm like, you know, listen. but I struggle more with the other side of it, which is, the disposition to to keep listening, even though maybe somebody is. It's not them, right? It's not personal. It's just. However, it could even be that however I'm trying to get my message across is not. I may be abrasive for all I know,
exactly, but so just getting one's message across, that can be just informational, or that can be browbeating. That can be
abrasive, right?
Yeah, abrasive, or being, difference in dialogue between. There's a difference between dialogue and
monologue.
messaging. Messaging, right? So I think there's a really big difference, because the dialogue entails, presupposes that there's going to be some give and take. That there's going to be.
So is that the disposition? Be willing for the give and take?
Well, the problem here is Laura and you might not both have the kind of background or preparation to be dispositional in that way. Maybe, Laura was, which you haven't been,
right.
raised or trained in a household that was really strongly ideological, and really stuck to your guns, and you're just going to hold on to those beliefs no matter what anybody said to you or anything, right? These are your hard-fought and hard-earned positions, and you're going to stick to that position no matter what, and no matter what the other person says, and I'm not going to even let you talk, right?
Exact same way, exactly. I mean, as you say it, I could just think of so many people. There are many people that are like that. There's
also
that challenge.
Some of us were raised in households where we had to have the last word, period. So we would keep arguing until, right? Or raising our voice. So as to get our point across, right? And some of us are raised in households where we're just more reserved, and in fact, there's not enough communication, maybe, right? Not enough dialogue. But
because I think disposition runs deep, right? It's has to do with our family and community backgrounds, and not just our educational context. So the educational can be reformist and rehabilitative, but it could be struggling against anti-dialogical forces.
Yes, and there are so many. Yes, there's and with education, yes, there are so many other forces at play. I mean, yes, you can't deny that. But I mean, it's just interesting the points that are being brought up, and it makes me think. It does make me think. Really, deeper. But what were you?
Well, I was just thinking, right? Culturally. It's when we lived in India, it was real interesting because they raise their voices and speak louder, right, and faster, and they're speaking in a language that I don't understand, so I'm not really sure what they're saying, right? But I can just hear, but that is many times normal, at least in New Delhi. I don't know if I can generalize and say in the whole country, but culturally, right? So some of us. The way that we engage in conversation or dialogue is more of a debate, and as opposed to, I mean, so like, what is dialogue? Is dialogue always peaceful and open to each other and like a nice low monotone? I don't know. Or can we be in dialogue still when we are shouting at each other?
I want to turn then to your other subspecialty here. What is the difference between, for you, Laura, dialogue and debate?
Dialogue and debate. Well, and with debate, when I taught that in the high school context, it's you build. Well, it gets very, very competitive, and so you build. So they have to build a case, and they give them a statement, and they take both sides of the statement, whether it be if you're looking at the. They had different, depending on what they would use current events, and so then they would look at something that was going on, and then the teams had to really build argumentation, the two sides. So one side pro con, and then they go back and forth on it, and they try to find who has a stronger argument, right? And so and it's about, well, it's about winning. It's about who, you know, who is, what side is better, what side has a better argumentation. It's judged, it's scored, and you know, it's fun for the students and everything, and it really helps them if they go to different things, if the careers, if they want to go into law, you know, different things that where they're going to need that. So really it's beneficial. And dialogue, see, for me, and I think more because in my household, you know, I was more, you know, it's just always been very calm and very just attentive to others, supportive of others, and my father was like that, and my mother, maybe she was the opposite. She was more argumentative, but I learned to be like that and more open to other people, hearing other people's stories, and anyways, and as a woman, so growing up, I really had to, you know, not be silenced, right? And so that was a struggle for me and for many women. In dialogue, I think, I think all those components are important. Not being silenced, you know, speaking speaking about you, and I don't want, there's, you know, there is, because the phrase is used, speaking your truth, you know, or being in your truth, right? But anyway, so dialogue. For me, because of that, the dialogue, I mean, sometimes you're not going to have a winning side. This is all I have to say. And debate you do. And you know, it's because it's, you know, you build it and so. But with dialogue, I mean, it's ongoing, it's evolving. Every time there's something new to it or something new added, then you think you finally have it, and then someone throws a wrench in you know, your way of seeing things, and you're like, oh, what? And so then there you go again. And rethinking or reevaluating your, you know, whatever your knowledge, ethics, whatever you're looking at, and reevaluating. So I think this is the difference between dialogue and debate is that, and I think that's why dialogue is strong, right? Because, and we talk about different players or different scholars, different perspectives, and so well, you know that, and I'm sure in philosophy, more than my field, you couldn't be there forever, right? Philosophizing, or, you know, and so,
yeah.
but that's the beauty of it.
But that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's why I raised that question.
We do come to what I like to call warranted assertability.
Yeah, but I raised that question because it, to me, and you touched on a lot of the aspects of what I think about debate, right? That it's competitive. And the only reason I'm in a conversation with you is so that I can gain an advantage, right? And so I can win the point, right? So I can win the point. So I'm the last man standing, right? Or the last woman standing.
It's like a kung fu fight
Yeah,
or a
it's
Western.
definitely, it's not we're going to walk out the door together despite our differences.
And learn
right?
from each other.
That's not the point.
You know?
And the point is to win in court, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to teach rhetoric.
Yeah.
You have to teach,
Yeah.
you
Of
know,
course,
how do you
of
identify
course.
the weakness of the other, right?
Of course.
As
Yes.
opposed to, well, listening to their weakness, but listening to their weakness with understanding, right? Not as opposed
The
to
goal is different,
weaponizing
huh?
it, right?
Yeah.
You know, and that's the difference, I think, between debate and dialogue, because dialogue is this ongoing process that is open-ended, you know, and there isn't necessarily a resolution when you're engaged in a dialogue with somebody.
It's a win-win.
It's,
If you're
or it should be
genuinely,
anyway,
right? If you're genuinely. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that we can be in dialogue with everybody, with anyone?
And then that one gets me, because I'm very optimistic, you know, I'm very, you know, just loving of everyone, and I want to say yes, right? Because I do think that you can, but I know that, like as Jules was talking about, when, you know, someone is holding on to their upbringing or their beliefs, and they're very gung-ho, and you're like, I mean, but I am an advocate, or I do think you can, and I think, and it's hard, because I've known those people, right, or individuals, and so they start off a conversation or the dialogue, you know, thinking the way they think, and they leave thinking the way they think, and there's been no change, or there's been no difference. I mean, and we see it, and
That we see.
Oh, No, I like that
But
though. I like that.
that we see.
So this is a nice insight about dialogue that you bring up, that there's not been any change in a conversation when there's not two dialogue partners,
Yeah, because
right?
there's not give and take.
There's not a give and take, and so it ends up not being transformational.
Well,
Right.
that we see,
Yeah.
that we see because it's happened to me, as I'm sure it's happened to the both of you being educators, right? Where years later, I run into a student and they told me, Miss, thank you so much for, like we, sometimes they don't even do well in our class, but we planted a seed and we don't see it sprout, and in fact we think it died and like rotted and it didn't work,
Yeah, at all. Yeah.
But then, maybe that person hasn't had the experiences necessary for them to be transformed right there and then and be like, oh yes, you're right, Kim. Wow, never thought about that. But years later,
Yeah.
maybe, or I don't know, after some experiences, they be like, yeah, that I had that conversation with
Sure.
Laura, and
And
now
then
I
this-
understand.
And no, I think that's so true, and we never know the power or the impact of something that we say. But what was I going to say? And so then that goes back to the question. I do think you can be in dialogue with anyone, but I know that there are, like you say, maybe there are times where you feel like you're going nowhere or you're up against a wall.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and especially now in this climate, I've never seen anything quite like it. I mean, but anyway, but I do feel that you still have to enter in dialogue because, like you say, maybe you can plant that seed. Maybe later on, as they obtain more growth or more experiences, or it's a process, right? I mean, when you think about things like that.
Yeah, because expressing one's true self has a measure of the strength of one's convictions too, right? So it's not a bad thing to stand one's ground, right? And it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Oh.
Yeah,
But-
especially if you think you're right.
But on the other hand, if you just insist that you're right without being open to listening to another perspective, then ultimately I think that's poisonous. I don't think that's a formula for growth, for instance, where you think you're right to the extent that no one else can be right, right? So, but I want to actually shift a little bit. So I glanced through some of the information you sent us, your CV, and so I know you work in speech, right, in that discipline, and we're talking about dialogue. So, but there's a group of people who work in the speech discipline who work on pathologies.
Mm-hmm.
And do you find in your work, do you ever run up against that kind of phenomenon, and how does that affect the possibilities for dialogue if someone has some kind of, maybe this is a belief and mental pathology that someone has that they're holding onto their ideology, right? But I'm speaking more about what we think are
Is the
standard
norm,
pathologies, right?
But also the norm and the imposition of the norm. I'm thinking, the norm coming down and dictating what is a pathology as opposed to what is within the realm of normal.
Oh, yeah.
As
That would
opposed
be like a Foucaultian sort of take on that, where
if we question the norm.
you normativize,
Mhm.
what is just peculiar in people.
Interesting. I mean, I'm just loving the dialogue. I'm like, wow. I'm like, as we as we ask
The
these
deeper we go,
questions,
right?
and and I'm
we
like,
never run
wow.
out of work.
And right, there are certain pathologies, right, that are very destructive, very but and we do run across it. How do we deal with it? There's trying to think of an instance or a situation.
Can we be in dialogue with someone who is right, who's got a pathology?
right? I don't know. It's just like a tricky one, right? It makes me think, and it makes me question. And
I mean, maybe this person just needs a different drug regimen. You know?
Or maybe they just need to speak and express themselves and to be heard authentically.
Yeah.
Instead of,
That's true.
like categorized.
And that's generous, right?
I mean, we don't know.
We don't know, right?
And I guess this leads me to the next question, being in dialogue with another, if there's an ethics, right?
Oh,
because
yeah.
and
That was
and
my
I
next
thought it was really interesting too, because you talk about power in your research and acknowledging our own power, right? And so like we forget, but for instance, a counselor, right, who is in dialogue with their patient, and yet they're the ones that can diagnose the disorder or the pathology, right? So if we don't acknowledge our power when we come into dialogue with another, or privilege when we come into dialogue with another, but the other person may be holding back about expressing really what they're thinking and feeling because they know they're being judged. And as educators, we are evaluating our students, right? So
Well, judged and left out of the possibility even for entering into dialogue then. If someone's, reticent, by disposition, right? They're not going to be expressive.
well,
right?
they might just be holding back a little bit out of
Maybe they're holding
fear.
back a lot. Maybe they're just really shy. And
Right,
don't
out
wanna
of fear
talk
of
or out of fear, right.
and
That's a good one.
so because they're being evaluated, right? And so so what is the ethics of how can does it include acknowledging our power or authority or privileges in the dynamic,
Yeah, I think it's a powerful question. I think, and it comes into, you do have to acknowledge it. I mean, like I say, that power privilege that you have. And because I've looked at research, or when we, different books that I've read, or different studies, when you think of indigenous knowledge, right? And then they talk about insider, outsider, right? Anyways, and so... And even so, when we talk about communities of color or people of color, insider being an insider or an outsider, right? And sometimes you, as an outsider, you do more damage. And so, anyways, and so it's those complexities, I think, that come to my mind, that I think about, and I know, and there's a lot of research on indigenous knowledge, and those that are indigenous also, doing their own research, their own way. And so when you think about, colonization, all these things, but I'm thinking in the, like you say, ethics of it, and the complexity of it, like of those, as even just a teacher and a student, right? Or because we are grading them, and they're getting a grade at the end of the course, right? So there's the kind of hold back. And so I think the same thing with research, or sometimes you just don't get everything. You don't get authenticity even from students, or just different research, and that's why the ethics of it, right? And so always to be cognizant or aware of I think kind of stepping back and not trying to superimpose yourself or your ideology on others is what I'm saying, or because there are different ideologies, and as powerful as the next, right? I mean, we don't know which one's superior or above others, and we never will, and one isn't.
Mine is.
and
I know that.
Right, and so I don't know. It's a good questions, I think, that are very important to think about as we dialogue with each other. And sometimes I feel, and there are no answers, or there are no straightforward or direct answers, right? Because it's very complex. As I think about that, but anyways, so that's what my thoughts as you asked that question.
It makes me think that maybe one of the drawbacks of having more power is that you may have less authentic dialogue with others because others may not feel comfortable, speaking, being themselves, right, around you, unless somehow we make them feel comfortable. We take the time to create classrooms where there's a space where they feel comfortable sharing, right?
And I think we all do that, Henry, as educators, right? Yes, or we try to, and we do, and
well, that is part of there's an ethical responsibility on the part of someone who has more power over another to be able to help create the possibility for dialogue, to put it that way, right? So there is that ethical responsibility, and I think that's something that we're taught. I don't think that comes naturally. I think that we have to get taught that in these kind of empathic relationships that we engage in.
yeah.
I'd like to ask also, Laura, if you have questions for us, speaking of, being, instead of us like
Badgering you
Yes.
with questions.
No.
Do you have questions?
Feel free to ask, if you have any questions at any point. But we have one more that I'm interested in. What would you say stops us from being in dialogue with others? What do you think are the reasons?
What stops us? I think not only it's so much more than the fear of losing power, the fear of being seen as less or or lacking something, and so I find that
Human.
human,
Being seen for
right?
the human we are.
I find that people are more resistant or more maybe they get upset or angry when you try to enter in dialogue with them or any kind of discussion you're having, and in that you're questioning their authority or you're trying to and there's this pushback, but so I think some of that
Fear.
Fear, hate, but don't get me. Hate is so. I mean, that's just a word. It's so complex. I mean, I don't know. There's
maybe I'm reducing things, as you said I shouldn't, but I think maybe part of hate is fear, and I think but it's to our own detriment because it's an opportunity to figure out. I mean, if I'm wrong, even though I don't like it when people point out that I'm wrong, especially someone close to me, but I'd rather know. And so that fear stops me from learning and growing.
Yeah, definitely. My question is, as you've seen all these different speakers or guest speakers that you've had here in your program, what have you loved about it, or what have you learned? Anything?
Have you learned anything from
I mean, or
right?
that has really maybe stuck with you, it's just powerful. Anything that stands out?
I think I already know, but then when I'm speaking with somebody else, it's real interesting to see how they disclose a new idea that I hadn't explored. So it's really cool to see those wrinkles iron themselves out for me. To me, I'm enjoying that.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and for me, it's the discovery of a new window of seeing things from different perspectives similarly, but there's a joy in having these kinds of dialogues. And Kim, before you got here, Kim was saying, "Oh, I'm really starting to like this place a lot." And besides it just being comfortable chairs and a kind of ambient sort of atmosphere. It
makes me feel like a movie star.
It's the conversations that we're having here that are generating such, good connections, good connections. And hopefully ones that will last. So.
Yes, I think it's a continuing.
A part of the dialogue ongoing.
Now we know more of each other, right?
Right.
And now we can continue.
Exactly.
And
That's the
expand.
continuation of the dialogue.
Yes, exactly.
So yes, thank you so much, Laura, for joining us today, and thank you for our audience again for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next time.